Why hello there my internet friends, my name is John Jagsy and today I'm going to show you how I procedurally textured some dice in Cinema4d and Redshift for a promo video that I did for one of my clients, Ultra Pro International. So without further ado, let's talk about some procedural dice textures. Alright, we are in Cinema4d and we have my IPR running right now, and just a quick breakdown. The dice have textures for each of them just so that they can have the numbers projected onto it. Today we're just going to be talking about the refraction and the glitter and connecting it to the dice drivers. So my favorite part about this is that if I were to change the color of this, it would change the color of the dice. And if I were to change the color of this to something else, we would get an entirely different look, all driven by these two textures. Pretty cool, right? So I have this base texture for my tutorial that you are watching currently. We're going to open up the shader graph there, and we're going to hit save and make sure that we save this. And put it, nope, not there. Put it, texturing V3. Alright, so we have our dice texture, and we're first going to add a blend material. So, blend, material blender, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to pipe in the blender into the output. Surface, rather. So now that's just going to turn black because there's nothing really on it. So first we have to make our base color texture on the dice. So first, let's look up a Maxon noise. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pipe in this into our base color. After we pipe it into our base color, we're going to start playing with this noise. And the reason why we do this first is we're going to see where the texture is looking to get that accurate swirl. So we really need to scale this down because the dice are pretty small. So let's try 0.15, maybe 0.05, maybe 0.1. Yeah, that could be a good start for us. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pipe this Maxon noise and we're going to put it into our properties and then look for our refraction and then refraction color. Then we're going to take this material that is here and we're going to put it into our base color. And the reason why we did that is we just wanted to see what the noise was doing. So now we can go into this material that we have, and we're going to go to our base properties, bring the weight down for the color all the way. We're going to bring up the roughness to like say 0.15 so it's a little bit softer in the reflections. And then we're going to go to our refraction and bring the weight all the way up. So now we're getting some clear dice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the color of the Maxon noise and start playing with the fun part. So if I want to match these two colors here, let's just eyeball it to start. So we got a red, and then we'll pipe in some blue or green or something into that color too. And we can see that we're getting a sort of blended color look. Now I want to go in and start fussing with the roughness until I get something that matches. And I actually don't recall what those numbers were, so I'm just going to look back just for my own curiosity. So the roughness was 0.5, and then the weight of the refraction was 0.3, absorption scale, got it. Okay. I know I was going pretty fast there, but if we go back into our main texture, we can set this to 0.16 and then set the roughness to 0.5. And then if we look at the thing one more time, 0.031 for the scatter scale. So we're going to go into our material that we are blending here, and then it's going to have 0.031. And if we show that, that looks pretty close. We're getting somewhere. But now what we're missing is the glitter on the dice. So how do we do that? So obviously what we could do is we could make our own glitter texture in Substance and then put it on. But that takes a lot of work, and that's a lot of time. I want to try and stay in Cinema4d if I can. So now what we're going to look up is a car paint. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this car paint, and we're going to attach it to our output, just so we can see what's happening with the car paint. So now the dice is red. This first material that we worked with is not actually doing anything anymore. We're just looking at the car paint. I want to go into the layer diffuse, bring down the weight. I want to go into the specular, bring down the weight. I want to go into the metallic flake, and then bring the weight all the way up, and then reflectivity for everything all the way up. And then I'm going to start scaling down and trying to see where all of this is. And I might need to go into, go into your base layer diffuse and set that to a white, just so I can see the flake. We can see there's some little specks on there now. Let's bring up the density by quite a lot, bring down the scale to 0.01, and then maybe bring down the density. So we're getting a little bit, maybe it was 0.005, and then bring down the density just a little bit more. And now if we zoom in, Control S, save early and save often, my friends. We will zoom in on that dice, and we're getting that glitter on the dice, which is exactly what we wanted. So once our car paint is set up, then we need to figure out how to blend this on top of the original texture that we made. So to do that, we're gonna unpipe the surface from the car paint. So uncheck that, and we'll drag this into our material blender and into layer color 1. And then you're going to take this material blender and pipe it into the surface there. And then what we're going to see in our material blender is that you're going to have a blend color, and then you're going to have a checkbox for additive. So basically what it's asking is, how do I take the second material and overlay it on top? Now we're trying to add this texture, this car paint, on top of the refraction, but if you think about black is a value of zero color, 0 luminance, etc. So we're not actually adding because 1 plus 0 is still 1. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set the blend color to white, fully white, and then make sure we have the additive checked, and now we can see that we have the glitter all over the dice, and that is exactly what we wanted. And now what's really cool is we could go in and change the color of this. Let's just make this a blue just for fun, and then we can set this to like a teal sort of thing, and that glitter is still gonna be there. So this is a really fun way that you can add and overlay textures on top of each other. So now what we have to do is put the numbers on, because if we look at our reference, we obviously have some numbers. Now, because of the way we were going to be animating some of these dice and doing some other fancy things, we wanted to keep the topology low so that we weren't dealing with a lot of geometry in the scene. So we wanted to do that with textures instead. So now we need to add our textures to this, the numbers. The way we did that is we went into Substance Painter and effectively created the textures to wrap around the dice. So we can see here that I have all of these really interesting looking textures on the dice, but it needs to wrap around it. So we're going to take all this stuff here, we're going to drag it into our node editor. I normally keep everything saved within its own project structure, so I hit no because this window is asking Do you want to save a copy of this texture that's close to the project file? I don't, because I don't want to have copies upon copies of textures in my folders and waste hard drive space. So now what we're going to do is we're going to delete the roughness. I know I don't need that. We're going to use the normal, and we're going to use the metalness, and we're going to use the height. So now what we need to do is we need to make another texture. So we're going to go into our nodes, and we'll call this texture or material. Excuse me, we want a material. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set this to white, because the numbers are white. So just make it white. Generally, a good rule of thumb is to make things slightly off white. So 95% white is fine. And then we're going to pipe this into our material blender and then set this to layer color 2. And if we set this to additive and then set this to white, now what's going to happen is the dice is going to turn completely white. What we have to understand is that the blend color on these layers on the material blender is looking for values between 1 and 0, and 0 is black, white is 1. So now what we can do is we can take this metalness texture. It's actually not metalness, but we're just using it as like a clipping mask or an alpha matte to say, hey, we want this white material, this guy, to be, setting the roughness to 0.5 just for matching sakes. We want the material to be white only wherever it is white on the numbers. So what I mean by that is if I pipe this metalness into our layer 2 and blend color, those numbers cut out perfectly. So now we have that look of the dice sort of coming out and showing us the numbers, but they're still kind of indented. And the way we worked around that is we then have to make a bump map. So we have our little bump with the displacement height. You could also use a displacement map, but we kept the geometry pretty low for this, so we're going to use a bump map instead. So we'll take the displacement height and we'll put this into a bump map node, and we'll put it into the input here, and we're going to put the bump map blender down because we're going to blend this normal in here as well. Drag this over. We'll make another bump map, and we will texture, input, same deal. Now we have this bump map blender, and we're going to take this normal and pump it into the base input. Then we're going to take all this stuff and drag it over. I'm going to take this bump and plug it into the bump input. Now we want them to add in the same way that this material blender is working. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on additive mode, and then for that layer 0, that bump input 0, we're going to set the bump weight to 1. Just max it out. 1. Then we're going to take this bump blender and pipe it into the overall bump input. And that pushes the numbers in just a little bit. It's a really subtle effect, but on the actual dice, it still is pretty subtle. And the reason why we did it this way is because we wanted to keep the geometry low, because future projects involve us using lots and lots of dice, and we didn't want to overwhelm the scene. So now what we can do is we can pump this into our second material, our base material, and we are pretty much good to go with that. So now we have that bump, and if we zoom out on this dice here, we have the dice that is obviously the one for the tutorial right here, and then the other ones that are driven by these colors. So the last thing we have to do now is we have to go into our colors for dice color 1. We'll right click and we'll click on expressions. We'll call this set driver, and then we're going to go into that tutorial dice texture, and we're going to go to our shader graph and find that max on noise. So we know that color 1 is this color, obviously by color 1. So we'll right click on that and click on expressions, and then set driven absolute. After we set it to driven absolute, we can see that it turned to that red color. And then now we need to do the same thing for this blue color and set it to this green. So we'll go back, we'll right click, expressions, set driver, and then right click and expressions, set driven. And now you'll see these two little nulls popped up in your object manager. Let's rename these just so we know that what these are, just in case something happens, we know what's going on. So we'll call this driver tutorial dice 1, and then we'll name the second one driver tutorial dice 2. Now, if I close my shader graph and then I change these colors, we can see that that dice works in magically with this color driver, which is my favorite part about this technique, and the reason why it is different as far as the texture on the dice. We can see the tutorial one is a little different from the actual ones that I created for my client. The reason is that if we go in here and we go into the max on noise and we play with the noise, we can get a completely different look. And if I were to try and get it to match, I would just make sure I go into my other textures and make sure that the noise matched identically. But for this is the same exact effect, and we can do some really fun things. We could set this to 0.001 and set this to like a cell noise, maybe 0.1, 0.5. Anyways, you get the idea. You could play with it and you get a completely different look on the dice, and it's all built procedurally. And the reason why we did that is because I think it's fun. I think it's cool to make these fun little rigs that can change very easily and be very art directable for your projects. So I hope you learned something. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. If you did not and you have questions, comments, concerns, whatever else, let me know in the comment section as well, or you can hit me up on Instagram at JohnJagsNey, and I will leave you with one final tip, and that is to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and you'll make some gains. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.